I sat quietly at our old oak dining table, watching steam curl lazily from my coffee mug. The morning light spilled through the kitchen window, casting a golden hue on the worn wooden surface. It should have been a peaceful beginning to the day, but instead, the room felt like it was shrinking with tension. My husband, Daniel, paced relentlessly across the creaky floorboards, each step filled with a barely contained fury. The argument from the night before lingered like smoke-heavy, choking, inescapable. His sister, Brianna, had once again begged for financial help. It wasn't new, and deep down, I knew it wouldn't be the last time. She'd asked to borrow my credit card, claiming it was for an emergency, though her emergencies usually meant expensive shoes or spa days. When I refused, it sparked a wildfire in Daniel. I took a sip of my coffee. The bitterness on my tongue mirrored the bitterness in the air. His pacing made me anxious, but I did my best to keep my composure. I could feel him staring, practically daring me to change my mind. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. This pattern had gone on far too long. "Daniel," I said softly, slicing through the silence. "We need to talk about this calmly. We can't keep enabling Brianna's reckless spending. It's not fair to us, and honestly, it's not helping her grow." He halted mid-stride, turning to face me, his jaw tight and cheeks flushed. "Not fair? Not helping? Sophie, she's my sister. Family comes first. How can you be so heartless?" The words hit like a slap, but I held firm. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. We've bailed her out more times than I can count, and nothing's changed. If we really care about her, we'd help her stand on her own 2 feet, not hand her a crutch every time. Daniel's nostrils flared, the vein in his forehead twitching. "You don't get it? You've never had siblings. You don't understand what that kind of loyalty looks like." The words stung, but I swallowed the hurt. "Maybe I don't have siblings," I said evenly, "but I understand responsibility. Right now, our responsibility is to this household, to our future. We can't keep emptying our savings to clean up Brianna's messes." For a moment, he seemed to waver. His shoulders slumped slightly, and I hoped just briefly that maybe he was listening. But then his gaze turned cold. "You will give her your credit card," he said, voice low and dangerous. "She's coming over this afternoon, and you'll hand it to her with a smile. Understood?" A shiver ran through me, but I stood my ground. "No, Daniel, I won't. We can support her in better ways, like helping her budget or talking to a financial coach. But I won't be her ATM anymore." I never got to finish my thought. Without warning, Daniel snatched his coffee mug off the counter and hurled it at me. Time seemed to freeze. I watched the stream of coffee arc through the air, and then, in a flash, the scalding liquid splashed across my cheek, my neck, soaking my blouse. The pain was instant, sharp, and burning. I cried out, reeling from the shock. The mug shattered on the linoleum, ceramic shards skittering across the floor like jagged confetti. I raised my hands to my face, feeling the heat of the burn as my skin throbbed. Daniel's voice boomed through the kitchen. "You'll regret this. Brianna's coming, and you will give her that damn card or get out." His words struck deeper than the coffee. They were venom-vicious, hateful. I stared at him in disbelief, trying to process the man before me, the man I had once loved so deeply. Now, all I saw was rage and entitlement. Trembling, I reached for a kitchen towel and pressed it gently to my face. The sting of the coffee couldn't compare to the ache blooming in my chest. And then he stormed out, slamming the door behind him so hard that the framed photos on the wall rattled and tilted askew. For a long moment, I sat there, frozen, surrounded by the chaos coffee splattered across the table, broken ceramic glinting in the light, a small puddle forming on the floor. The same floor where Wed once danced barefoot on a lazy Sunday morning. Now it was just wreckage. Morning light spilled across the kitchen, illuminating the chaos left in Daniel's wake. The shattered ceramic on the floor glinted like the fractured pieces of our marriage, scattered and sharp. As the pain in my cheek began to dull to a throb, a deeper ache started to stir a truth that had long been buried beneath excuses and denial. This house, once our shared haven, had become a battleground. It no longer felt like home. The warmth we had poured into every corner had been replaced by tension, resentment, and control. The walls, once covered in laughter and dreams, now felt like they were pressing in on me, suffocating, cold, and unforgiving. I stood up slowly, my blouse clinging to my damp skin, the scent of burnt coffee sharp in the air. I glanced around the kitchen, and memories began to flood in, painting these walls with Daniel, the two of us laughing until we were covered in more paint than the walls themselves. Our first Thanksgiving. The turkey burned beyond recognition, but we still managed to laugh over store-bought pies. The countless mornings spent sipping coffee right here, talking about building a life together. Those memories were still here, but they felt contaminated. The love I thought we shared had curdled into something unrecognizable. The warmth had faded, replaced by icy silence and sharp words. The man I married wasn't just distant anymore, he was cruel, controlling. I walked to the bathroom, wincing as I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. My cheek was flushed, already beginning to bruise, a painful reminder of what had just happened. I gently dabbed at the skin, applying a cool cloth and trying to soothe the stinging burn. But no amount of water could cleanse the moment. I stared at my reflection and wondered how had we ended up here. When had Daniel's love for his sister turned into this dangerous fixation? And when did I become the enemy in my own marriage? I could still hear his voice ringing in my ears. Get the hell out. And for the first time, I thought maybe I should. The idea was terrifying, but also freeing. Could I really do it? Just leave? Where would I go? What would I do? I stared into my own eyes that looked tired and haunted, but also resolute. Deep down, I knew the answer. I had to go. For my safety. For my sanity. For myself. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone. I needed to talk to someone. I needed help. But as I scrolled through my contacts, a hollow ache spread in my chest. So many names and yet so much distance. Over the years, friends had fallen away, worn down by Daniel's possessiveness or frustrated by my endless excuses for why I couldn't come out. Then I saw it, Rachel, my best friend from college. The one person who had always tried to reach me, even when I'd pushed her away. I paused, shame creeping in as I thought about the times I ignored her texts, dismissed her concerns about Daniel. Would she even answer? I pressed the call button anyway. As the phone rang, I took a deep breath. My heart pounded. I had no idea what the next chapter of my life would look like, but I knew one thing. I would not be Daniel's punching bag, not physically, not emotionally, not ever again. I was done sacrificing my peace for someone else's chaos. Done silencing my own needs just to keep the peace. This was the beginning of something new. As I waited for Rachel to pick up, I made a quiet vow. This would be the last time Daniel would ever hurt me. I was choosing me. After the call ended, I sat in stunned silence, my thoughts swirling like a storm. My heart thudded loudly in the quiet house, each beat a reminder that I was still here, still standing. The old grandfather clock in the hallway ticked away the seconds with eerie precision, each one marking the slow collapse of the life I once thought was secure. I glanced around the living room. Everywhere I looked, pieces of our shared past stared back at me, the photo gallery from our trip to Crystal Lake, the wedding portrait we'd taken on a breezy afternoon in Windmere Cove, the rustic furniture we'd proudly picked out from that quirky antique shop in Rivertown. What happened to us? How had we gone from soulmates to strangers? My gaze drifted to the coffee table, where a framed picture of Daniel and me sat, a snapshot from our honeymoon gondola ride in Venice. He was grinning, trying to take a selfie, while I laughed beside him, carefree and glowing. I reached for the photo, my fingers brushing the glass. A single tear dropped onto the frame. I turned it face down. The past was over. It was a Saturday when I reached out and picked up the photo frame, running my fingers over the smooth glass. In the picture, Daniel and I were laughing in a gondola on the canals of Venice, his arm outstretched, trying to take a selfie while the gondolier behind us rolled his eyes with dramatic flair. We looked so happy, so full of light. I had believed with all my heart that our love could survive anything. A tear landed on the glass. I hadn't even realized I was crying. I gently set the photo face down on the table. I couldn't look at it anymore. This house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a prison. Each wall whispered memories that used to bring me comfort. Now they only haunted me. They held the echo of Daniel's outbursts and Brianna's endless intrusions. The laughter had died. The warmth had turned to frost. I touched my cheek. It still burned where the coffee had hit me. The sting had dulled, but it was a physical reminder of how far we'd fallen and how far Daniel had gone. This was it. The line had been crossed. There was no turning back now. A strange calm washed over me, as if my body finally accepted what my heart had been screaming for months. I had to leave. Not just for a few hours to cool down, for good. Once the decision settled in, I moved quickly. I walked to our bedroom, my bedroom now, and yanked open the closet door. My hand found the old blue Samsonite suitcase we'd bought for our honeymoon. As I pulled it down, a cascade of shoeboxes tumbled from the top shelf, their contents spilling across the floor. I knelt to clean up the mess, and my hand landed on a small velvet box. My breath caught as I opened it. Inside were the pearl earrings Daniel had given me for our first anniversary. He had saved for months to buy them, I remembered. He was so proud that day. For a fleeting second, I considered leaving them behind, but then I shook my head. No, they were mine. He didn't get to keep any part of me anymore. I tossed the box into my suitcase and began throwing in clothes, essentials, whatever I could manage. My hands trembled, but my mind was razor sharp. It felt like a fog had finally lifted, revealing a path I hadn't dared to see before. I moved through the house with purpose, collecting the things that mattered: my laptop, full of years of writing I'd tucked away, the quilt my grandmother sewed for me when I left for college, a box of letters from my parents, both long gone now. Every item I packed felt like an act of defiance, a reclaiming of the pieces of myself I had buried under Daniel's shadow. In the kitchen, I hesitated before reaching for the high cabinet above the fridge. Tucked behind old cookbooks was a small lockbox. I pulled it down, heart pounding, and entered the combination: my mother's birthday. Inside was the emergency cash I'd hidden away little by little over the years. Not much, but enough to get me started. As I stuffed the money into my purse, I caught sight of my reflection in the microwave door. The woman staring back at me looked both familiar and foreign. Her eyes were red and swollen, and a bruise had begun to form on her cheek, but behind all that, there was something else: determination. For years, I had explained away Daniel's behavior. He's just stressed. It's work. It's family. It'll pass. I told myself if I loved him enough, supported him enough, he'd go back to the man I married. But now I knew that man never truly existed. He was a character I'd created in my head, a fantasy built on hope and longing, not reality. I moved to the study, opening the filing cabinet and pulling out everything I'd need. My birth certificate, my social security card, important records. As I flipped through the folders, I found our marriage certificate. I stared at it for a moment. I remembered standing at that altar, full of conviction and love, surrounded by people who believed in us, who believed in him. How hollow those vows felt now. On impulse, I grabbed a pen from the drawer and drew a thick black line through our names. It wasn't legal, but it was symbolic. A statement. A release. This marriage was over, and I was taking my name back. I packed the last of my things into the trunk of my car. I stood for a moment at the edge of the driveway, staring at the house we had shared for 6 years. 6 years of compromises, of slowly giving up pieces of myself, my dreams, my friendships, even my voice, but not anymore. I thought about leaving a note, something to explain why I was going. But what was left to say? Daniel made his choice when he threw that coffee mug. Now I was making mine. What could I possibly say that Daniel didn't already know? He made his choice the moment he hurled that coffee mug at me. Now I was making mine. My chest felt tight as I slid into the driver's seat, but beneath the weight of fear was something else, something unfamiliar, something brave. Hope. I wasn't just running away. I was finally choosing me. For the first time in years, the road ahead was mine. And even though I had no idea where it would lead, I knew this much. I wasn't going back. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine hummed to life, but in my head, Daniel's voice still echoed. Brianna is coming by later. The audacity. In Daniel's world, my sacrifices were just a given my comfort, my safety, even my financial freedom. They were all expected offerings on the altar of his ego and his sister's whims. Well, he was in for a surprise when Brianna showed up to an empty house. Driving away felt surreal. As I passed the familiar tree-lined streets of Maple Hollow, it was like leaving behind a character I used to play. The version of me who stayed quiet, who gave in, who lost herself. I didn't know where I was headed. I just knew I had to keep driving. The fear crept in slowly. Where would I stay? How would I support myself? How does someone start over at 35? The unknown was terrifying, but not as terrifying as going back to him. After nearly an hour of aimless driving, I knew I needed a plan. I spotted a little roadside diner and pulled into the lot. The kind of place Daniel would have scoffed at. Too lowbrow for his taste. Inside, the warm scent of bacon and freshly brewed coffee wrapped around me like a blanket. For the first time all day, I realized I was hungry. I slid into a booth and ordered a coffee. The waitress smiled without judgment, just kindness, and it nearly broke me. I pulled out my phone, the screen a blur of names that once meant something. And then one stood out. Rachel. We hadn't spoken much in the past year, but she had always been there, even when I pushed her away, even when I made excuses for Daniel. My finger hovered over her name as doubt clouded my mind. What if she was done with me? What if she thought I was being dramatic? But then I remembered Daniel's twisted face, the sound of the mug crashing to the floor, the burn on my skin, and I knew. I had to try. I hit call and held my breath. On the third ring, her voice answered warm, familiar, and filled with concern. Sophie? Is everything okay? And that's when I broke. The tears poured out as I told her everything, the argument, the coffee, my frantic escape. She didn't interrupt, just murmured gentle words of support and outrage as I unraveled years of silence. When I finally fell quiet, Rachel said softly, "Sophie, I'm so sorry, but I'm so proud of you. You did the right thing." Her words were like a balm on the open wound that had become my soul. I had doubted myself for so long, questioned my feelings, rationalized Daniel's actions. But now, someone I trusted had seen it clearly. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't weak. I was finally free. As we talked, a plan began to take shape. Rachel told me she knew a lawyer, someone who specialized in helping women leave abusive situations. She'd call her first thing in the morning. In the meantime, she insisted I come stay with her. "But Rachel," I said, hesitating, "you have 2 little ones. I don't want to impose—" "Nonsense," she replied firmly. "Your family, and Emma and Josh will be thrilled to see their Aunt Sophie." By the time I hung up, the weight that had been crushing me for years felt just a little bit lighter. I wasn't alone anymore. I had a lifeline. I left a generous tip for the kind waitress and walked back to my car. As I typed Rachel's address into my GPS, a strange cocktail of emotions swirled in my chest: grief, fear, relief, and something else, excitement. This wasn't the end. This was a beginning. As I pulled up outside Rachel's home, a modest 2-story house with white shutters and flower beds bursting with color, my heart started to pound. What if her husband didn't want me there? What if she changed her mind? But before I could spiral any further, the front door flew open. Rachel came rushing down the steps, her wild red curls bouncing in the evening breeze. She looked exactly as I remembered, open, full of warmth and real. Without a word, she threw her arms around me. "Oh, Sophie," she whispered into my hair. "I'm so glad you're here." And for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself believe it. I was safe. Rachel's green eyes were full of warmth as she pulled me into a tight hug without hesitation. "Oh, Sophie," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so glad you're here." Something inside me cracked. Everything I'd been holding in fear, sorrow, rage, came rushing out all at once. I sobbed into Rachel's shoulder, years of repressed emotions finally spilling free. She just held me, gently rubbing circles on my back. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe now. We've got you." When I finally pulled away, still wiping at my face, I noticed a man standing in the doorway, tall, kind-eyed, with a calm presence. "Welcome, Sophie," he said simply, offering a gentle nod. "Come on in." "I've got some coffee going." That was Mark, Rachel's husband. He wasn't flashy or loud, but his quiet support spoke volumes. Inside, their home radiated a lived-in, comforting kind of chaos, the kind that comes from having young children. Toys were scattered across the floor, the walls covered in vibrant kid-made art. It couldn't have been more different from the cold, curated perfection Daniel insisted on. We settled in the kitchen with steaming mugs of coffee. It felt surreal, like I'd stumbled into a parallel universe where kindness and safety still existed. Rachel's 2 kids peeked around the corner. Emma, who was 7, squealed when she saw me. "Aunt Sophie!" she cried, running over for a hug. I knelt down and hugged her tight. Her little brother, Josh, only 4, hovered behind her shyly, peeking out with wide eyes. "Are you staying with us?" Emma asked excitedly. "Can we have a sleepover in the guest room?" I let out a surprised laugh, my first real one in weeks. "Not tonight, sweetie," I said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "But maybe soon, okay?" Mark gently ushered the kids into the living room to give us privacy. I turned back to Rachel, my throat tight. "Thank you," I whispered. "I don't know what I would have done without you." She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "That's what friends are for. Now let's figure out what comes next." For the next few hours we talked. Really talked. I shared everything: how my relationship with Daniel had unraveled, how I'd stopped recognizing myself in the mirror. Rachel listened without judgment, her presence steady and unwavering. "I feel so stupid," I admitted at one point, staring into the dark swirl of my coffee. "I should have left a long time ago. How did I let it get this bad?" Rachel shook her head firmly. "You're not stupid. Abusers wear you down little by little. They twist things until you can't tell what's real. But you saw through it and you left. That's what matters." She was right. I wasn't powerless anymore. Rachel had already gone one step ahead. She'd made an appointment for me the next morning with her friend Natalie, a lawyer who specialized in helping women leave abusive situations. "She's amazing," Rachel said. "She'll walk you through the legal stuff and make sure you're protected." The word divorce sat heavy on my chest, but not in a bad way. More like a stone I could finally set down. For years, I'd cycled between hope and heartbreak, thinking things would change. But now I knew. It was time to break free. Suddenly, I remembered something. "What about work?" I asked, my mind darting to the part-time librarian job I'd left behind. Daniel always called it my cute little hobby after I gave up on writing. Rachel's eyes lit up. "Actually, I might have just the thing. You remember my cousin Lila? She owns that cozy little bookstore downtown, the Book Nook. She mentioned she's looking for help. It's not full-time, but it's something." The idea made my heart flutter. A bookstore, surrounded by stories and words. It was a world Daniel had always dismissed, but one I secretly longed for. "It's perfect," I said softly. As the evening went on, we began to make lists: documents I'd need, people to call, basic essentials to replace. It was a little overwhelming, but for the first time in forever, I felt like I had agency. "Oh!" Rachel said suddenly, disappearing into the other room. She returned with a small gift bag and placed it in front of me. Inside was a prepaid cell phone. "I picked it up earlier today," she explained. "It's not connected to your old account. Daniel can't track it, and the records are private. You should use this going forward, just in case." My throat tightened as I stared down at the simple device. It was such a small object, but it meant freedom. "Thank you," I whispered. Tears rising again, but this time they weren't from fear. We wrapped up the night in quiet companionship. Rachel insisted I take the guest room for now. "You need rest." "Real rest," she said. "We'll take things one step at a time." And I believed her, because now I had a plan. I had a place. I had people who loved me. I wasn't running anymore. I was rebuilding. "You need a safe place to rest," Rachel said firmly. "We'll go by your hotel tomorrow to check out and grab your things." That night, as I lay in the unfamiliar bed of her guest room, wrapped in the soft sounds of a happy family home, I found myself thinking about Daniel. By now, he would have realized I was gone. Would he be worried? Angry? Would he even care? I imagined Brianna showing up to Orish House, expecting me to hand over my credit card like always. The thought of their surprise gave me a small, guilty thrill, but then I remembered Daniel's rage, the mug, the heat of the coffee on my skin. And just like that, any lingering doubt vanished. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about something I hadn't dared to in years: the future. What did I want my life to look like? Who was I now, if not Daniel's wife? The next morning, I woke early, more rested than I had been in months. From downstairs, the scent of coffee and sizzling bacon wafted up through the house. I could hear the cheerful chaos of Rachel's family starting their day. For a moment, I just lay there, letting the peace settle over me. Then I got up, ready to face the day whatever it might bring. After a quick shower, I joined them for breakfast. The kids were chatting a mile a minute about their plans for the day, while Mark quizzed them on their homework between bites of toast. It was messy, loud, and full of love, and it made something ache inside me. This was what a real family looked like. Later that morning, Rachel and I got ready to leave for my meeting with Natalie, the lawyer. As we buckled into the car, nerves twisted in my stomach. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Daniel wasn't going to let go without a fight, and there were still so many unknowns. But when I looked at Rachel, who had dropped everything to stand beside me, I realized something deeply comforting. I wasn't alone. I had support, and for the first time in forever, I had hope. Before we pulled out of the driveway, I opened my new phone and stared at the screen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. After a few deep breaths, I typed the message. I'm safe. I'm not coming back. Please don't try to contact me. My lawyer will be in touch. I stared at the words, my heart pounding. Was I doing the right thing? Should I give him one more chance? Then I remembered the rage in his eyes, the crash of the mug, the years of manipulation, of shrinking myself to keep the peace. No more. I pressed send. As Rachel started the car, she glanced at me with a smile. Ready? She asked. I took a steadying breath. Ready. And with that, we drove off toward something new. Something mine. Natalie's law office wasn't anything like I'd imagined. I expected cold lighting and stiff suits, but instead, the waiting area was warm and welcoming. Potted plants sat in cozy corners. Abstract art lined the walls in bursts of color. It felt like a place where people were heard. As Rachel and I waited, I found myself staring at one painting in particular, a swirl of blues and golds. I didn't understand it, but something about it held me. Then a gentle voice broke through my thoughts. Sophie? I looked up to see a woman in her mid-40s, dressed professionally but without pretense. Her eyes were kind, steady. Natalie. Come on in. As we stepped into her office, her eyes immediately flicked to the fading bruise on my cheek. Her expression softened. Rachel gave me a brief rundown. She said gently, but I'd like to hear everything from you, if that's okay. So I told her. For the next hour, I poured it all out. The years of silence, the slow unraveling, the financial control, the moment Daniel threw the mug. Natalie listened with unwavering focus. She took notes, occasionally nodding or asking questions, but mostly she listened. When I finally finished, she leaned back in her chair. Her voice was calm, but firm. What happened to you is not okay, Sophie. It's abuse, emotional, financial, and now physical. But you've taken the hardest step already. You left. Now, let's focus on how to protect you moving forward. We spent the next couple hours outlining a legal plan. We'd file for divorce immediately on grounds of irreconcilable differences and a record of abusive behavior. She explained how we could request a restraining order if needed, and even seek temporary support while I got back on my feet. As she spoke, I began to feel something strange. Not fear, not panic. Power. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone else to fix it. I was taking control, Natalie walked me through the steps of obtaining a restraining order, explaining how we might also petition for temporary alimony something to help me stabilize while I got back on my feet. Then I hesitated before asking the question that had been gnawing at me. What about the house? The home Daniel and I had shared for 6 years wasn't just bricks and furniture. It was where I had poured so much of myself into a life I thought we were building together. Natalie's eyes lit up with quiet strategy. Actually, she said, I might have an idea. Based on his recent behavior, we can petition for exclusive use of the house, at least temporarily. That could give you some leverage in the divorce negotiations. The thought of going back into that house made my stomach twist, but I understood the value. Still, there was something else bothering me. There's also his sister. Brianna, I added cautiously. She's been part of the problem for a long time. Daniel told her to go by the house to get my credit card. Natalie's expression tightened. Financial abuse is very real and very serious. We'll take steps to protect your credit and your assets. She won't get anything from you again. By the end of the meeting, I felt everything at once: uncertainty, fear, and something new: strength. Natalie had given me a roadmap I hadn't seen before, and for the first time, I wasn't walking this road alone. As we left her office, Natalie touched my arm gently. You're stronger than you think, Sophie. It won't be easy, but you've already done the hardest part, and you won't have to face the rest by yourself. Back at Rachel's house, we sat at the kitchen table reviewing everything Natalie had told us. Rachel had slipped into full planning mode, her natural teacher instincts kicking in. She tapped a pen rhythmically against a yellow notepad. Okay, she said, we need to collect all your key documents, change every password, and start documenting everything. Oh, and we should pick up some basics for you. New clothes, essentials. I nodded, overwhelmed but incredibly grateful. Rachel, I don't know how we'll ever repay you. She reached across the table and gave my hand a squeeze. You don't have to. That's what friends are for, she smiled. Besides, I always knew Daniel was a jerk. It's about time someone knocked him off his pedestal. We spent the rest of the afternoon making calls and sending emails. I canceled the joint credit cards, updated every online password, and set up a new email address. Each step felt like reclaiming a lost part of myself. That evening, Rachel's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then looked up at me with a mix of nerves and excitement. It's Lila, she said, her cousin who ran the Book Nook. She wants to know if you can come in tomorrow for an interview. My heart jumped. Working in a bookstore had always been a dream Daniel deemed unrealistic. Now, that very dream stood at my doorstep. Yes, I said, the word coming out more confidently than I expected. Tell her I'd love to. That night, lying in the guest bed, my thoughts swirled. I couldn't help but wonder what Daniel was thinking. Was he worried? Furious? Already planning his next move? And what about Brianna, walking into an empty house with no credit card waiting for her? Part of me felt a pang of guilt, but a larger part of me felt free. The next morning, I woke early. My body buzzed with nervous energy. Rachel helped me pick out an outfit soft blouse and a navy skirt. Simple, but professional. I looked in the mirror and, for once, recognized myself. The Book Nook was everything I imagined and more. Cozy shelves stretched to the ceiling, the scent of paper and ink filling the air. There were reading nooks tucked into corners and fairy lights strung along the rafters. Lila met me near the front. She was vibrant, with cropped hair and a kind smile that immediately put me at ease. After a bit of small talk about books and my background, she leaned forward. Rachel tells me you're in a bit of a tough season. I hesitated. How much should I share? But something in Lila's expression felt safe. "I'm leaving my husband," I said. The words still felt foreign on my tongue. "I need a fresh start." Lila nodded, her tone shifting to gentle sincerity. "Well, I can't promise you much in terms of pay, at least not yet, but what I can offer is a place where you'll be safe, a peaceful place to work, and all the books you can get your hands on." My throat tightened. It sounded like heaven. "When can I start?" I asked, unable to hide the hope in my voice. Lila chuckled. "How about next Monday? That'll give you a little time to breathe." I left the store clutching the small welcome packet she handed me, a tremble of joy rippling through my chest. For the first time in a long, long while, something felt right. Clutching the Book Nook's new employee handbook to my chest, I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in so long. Hope. For the first time in years, I was making decisions for myself, charting my own course, on my own terms. But my optimism was short-lived. When I returned to Rachel's house, I found her pacing in the kitchen, her brow tight with worry. "What's wrong?" I asked, my heart lurching. She hesitated, then silently handed me her phone. On the screen was a series of text messages from Daniel. My blood ran cold as I read the first one. "Where is she? I know you're hiding her. If she's not home by tonight, I'm coming to get her myself." The words blurred as the room spun around me. My knees weakened, but Rachel was there, steadying me and guiding me into a chair. "It's okay," she said firmly. "He doesn't know where you are, and we're not going to let him near you." But I knew Daniel. Once he latched onto an idea, he would not let go. The thought of him showing up at Rachel's door, her children inside, made me nauseous. "I should go," I said, my voice shaking. "I can't put you and your family at risk." Rachel shook her head with steel in her voice. "No way. We're in this together." Then a glint of resolve flashed in her eyes. "I have an idea." She picked up her phone and dialed. "Natalie, it's Rachel. We need your help. How fast can we get that restraining order?" As she explained the situation, I sat at the table, my mind racing. In just a few days, my entire life had changed, leaving Daniel, finding Rachel again, meeting Natalie, landing the interview at the bookstore. And now this. I couldn't let him pull me back in. A plan began to form in my mind. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't safe. In fact, it was probably a little cruel, but it was necessary. When Rachel hung up, I looked at her, breath steadying. "I have an idea," I said, "but I'm going to need your help." Her eyes widened as I explained. Slowly, a smile crept across her face. "Oh, Sophie," she said, a spark of pride in her voice. "I always knew you had it in you." For the rest of the day, we put our plan into motion, making calls, sending emails, tying every loose end. I didn't know how it would all play out, but for the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was leading. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, long shadows stretched across the living room floor. I sat quietly by the window, watching the street. Any minute now he'd show. But this time, I was ready. The sky had turned a brilliant shade of orange and rose when I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My pulse kicked up. I pulled the curtain back just enough to see Daniel's sleek black Audi, and in the passenger seat Brianna, wearing designer heels and enough perfume to announce her arrival before the doorbell. I took a breath, bracing myself. "They're here," I said quietly. Rachel, sitting on the couch, gave me a calm, encouraging smile. "Remember, you've got this. We're right here with you." I watched as Daniel stepped out of the car in his favorite tailored suit, his go-to outfit when he wanted to intimidate. Brianna strutted beside him, dressed like she was attending a cocktail party, not a confrontation. Their expressions were a mix of arrogance and irritation. Through the evening air, I could already hear Brianna complaining. "Can you believe she had the nerve to just leave like that? After everything you've done for her?" I couldn't hear Daniel's response, but the clenched jaw and narrowed eyes told me everything I needed to know. The doorbell rang its cheerful chime, completely at odds with the tension flooding the house. Rachel reached over and gave my hand one last squeeze before heading to the front door. I heard her voice, calm and cool. "Daniel." "Brianna." What a surprise. "Cut the crap, Rachel," Daniel barked. "Where is she?" "I know Sophie's here." "Why don't you come in?" Rachel said, her voice calm but unreadable. "We can talk about this civilly." I could hear their footsteps coming down the hallway. My palms were slick with sweat, but I took a slow breath and stayed rooted. I had a plan, and I was sticking to it. Daniel barged into the living room first, his eyes locking onto mine. For just a heartbeat, I saw a flicker of relief in his expression. But it vanished just as quickly, replaced by the familiar scowl of fury. "Sophie," he said, his voice low and seething, "what the hell do you think you're doing?" I stood up, spine straight, gaze steady. "I'm leaving you, Daniel." My voice was surprisingly clear. "Steady. Our marriage is over." Brianna gasped like she was watching a soap opera. Daniel's face darkened, red climbing his neck. "You can't just leave," he barked. "You're my wife. You have responsibilities, obligations." I took a breath, heat rising in my chest, but this time it wasn't fear. It was strength. "My only obligation is to myself," I replied. "I'm done being your punching bag. I'm done watching you put your sister's every whim above our marriage." Brianna stepped forward, her eyes flashing with fury. "How dare you? Daniel's always taken care of you." "You ungrateful." "That's enough," Rachel cut in, her voice sharp. "This is between Sophie and Daniel. You don't get a say." Daniel turned on Rachel, fists clenched. "Stay out of this. It's family business." "Family?" I laughed, bitter and exhausted. "Is that what you call it, throwing a mug at my face? Demanding I hand over my credit card to your sister?" Daniel had the decency to look momentarily shaken, but he recovered quickly, schooling his face into that familiar look of forced calm. "You're exaggerating. It was just a fight. If you'd come home, we could fix this." I shook my head, feeling the weight of every excuse I'd made for him melt away. "No, Daniel. We're past that. I've made my decision. You can't just decide that," he shouted, stepping toward me. "I won't let you ruin everything we've built." For a moment, fear flickered in my chest, but before he could take another step, a new voice cut through the air. "That's far enough, Mr. Bennett." All heads turned to the doorway. Standing there, calm and commanding in a pressed navy suit, was Mr. Alden, my lawyer. He looked every bit the part cool, professional, and immovable. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Who the hell are you?" Alden stepped forward slowly, his voice deliberate. "I'm Sophie's attorney, and I'd advise you to take a step back from my client." The color drained from Daniel's face. "Attorney?" he sputtered, glancing at me. "Sophie, what is this?" I drew in a breath and looked him dead in the eye. It's exactly what it looks like. I'm filing for divorce. Brianna made a dramatic choking sound. "Divorce? You can't be serious. Daniel, do something." But Daniel was frozen, staring at Mr. Alden like he'd just been hit with a brick. Mr. Alden took advantage of the silence. "Ms. Taylor has retained my services to handle all legal proceedings moving forward. If you have anything further to say, it can be said through me." Daniel finally found his voice. "This is insane. You can't just decide to end a marriage without talking to me." Mr. Alden remained unbothered. "I believe throwing a scalding mug of coffee at her ended that conversation, Mr. Bennett." Daniel's face paled. That was an accident." "I didn't mean save it for the court," I cut in, my voice flat. "I'm done listening to your excuses." Brianna, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly snapped back to life. "What about me?" she shrieked. Daniel promised me. Mr. Alden turned toward her, voice steely. "Ms. Bennett, Sophie's finances are no longer your concern. Any informal arrangements you had with your brother do not extend to my client or her assets." Brianna's mouth opened, then closed. For once, she had nothing to say. Daniel, however, wasn't done. "You think you can just walk away?" he growled. "After everything I've done for you? Everything I've given you?" A fire ignited in my chest. I stepped forward, no longer afraid. "Given me? What, Daniel? A life where I had to walk on eggshells? Where I lost my voice, my dreams, my self-worth just to keep the peace?" I shook my head slowly. "That's not love. That's control." Daniel stepped back slightly, stunned. "But I wasn't finished. And I'm done playing that game." "What exactly have you given me, Daniel?" I said, my voice shaking but strong. "A life where I have to walk on eggshells? Where I gave up my dreams, my friends, my entire self just to keep your temper at bay? That's not love. That's a prison." My words hit him like a blow. He actually staggered back a step, his face caught in a strange mix of confusion and hurt. And for a brief second, just a second, I saw a flicker of the man I once thought I loved. But then his eyes went cold again. "Fine," he spat. "If that's how you want to play it, then let's play. I'll fight you every step of the way, Sophie. You'll get nothing." Before I could even respond, Mr. Alden stepped forward, his voice firm and calm as ever. "I wouldn't advise that course of action, Mr. Bennett. My client has substantial evidence of your abusive behavior. If you choose to take this to court, all of it will come to light." Daniel's face drained of color, then turned crimson with rage. He opened his mouth, but Mr. Alden didn't give him the chance. "I believe we're done here," he said. "I'll be in touch with the divorce papers. And until then, I strongly advise you not to contact Ms. Taylor directly." Daniel looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Mr. Alden's expression stopped him. Instead, he turned to me, eyes burning. "This isn't over," he hissed. I met his glare head-on. "Yes, Daniel!" "It is." With that, he stormed out, Brianna following behind him like a kicked puppy. The door slammed shut, shaking the walls. And just like that, it was over. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the couch. Rachel was beside me in an instant, wrapping her arms around me. "You did it," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm so proud of you, Sophie." Mr. Alden cleared his throat, his tone softening. "You handled that incredibly well. It's not easy to stand up to someone like him, but you did, with courage and grace." I looked up at him, tears welling in my eyes. "Thank you. I couldn't have done any of this without you." He gave a small nod, the faintest smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "This is only the beginning, but you've already taken the hardest step. We'll handle the rest together." As he gathered his things and left, I sat quietly, the silence of the house finally peaceful. The confrontation I'd been dreading for days, weeks, years was finally behind me. Rachel returned with a warm cup of tea and settled beside me on the couch. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently. I took a sip, the warmth soothing my frayed nerves. "Honestly, I'm not sure. Relieved, I think. Scared, but free." Rachel squeezed my hand. That's completely normal. It's a big change. But you're not alone in this. You never will be again. As the adrenaline faded, the weight of everything I'd been through began to settle into my bones. But with it came something else, a quiet, persistent spark of hope. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving. I was rebuilding. The weeks that followed passed in a blur of paperwork, meetings, and emotional ups and downs. Each day brought a new challenge, but also small, precious victories. The first night I slept without waking from a nightmare. The first time I laughed, really laughed, without guilt. The first entire day I didn't think about Daniel at all. Rachel insisted I stay with her family until I got back on my feet. I protested, but she waved it off. That's what friends are for, she said. Besides, the kids love having you here. And it was true. Emma and Josh started calling me Aunt Sophie, pulling me into their games and stories. Their innocence, their joy, it was a balm to my battered spirit. And then there was the book nook. Working at the bookstore became my sanctuary. Lila, with her gentle humor and endless supply of tea, treated me like family. She always seemed to know when I needed a quiet moment or a kind word. There was something healing in the routine stacking books, helping customers, organizing displays, the smell of paper and ink, the soft shuffle of pages, the sense of stillness. It reminded me of who I used to be and who I still had the chance to become. Recommending books to customers, losing myself in the pages of a new story, those quiet, ordinary moments grounded me when the rest of my life still felt like shifting sand. About a month after I left Daniel, on a gray and rainy afternoon, I was restocking the fiction section when a familiar spine caught my eye. The Awakening by Kate Chopin. I remembered reading it back in college how deeply Edna Pontellier's story of self-discovery had resonated with me even then. On impulse, I pulled the copy from the shelf and began to flip through the pages. As I sank into Edna's words, something inside me stirred. Her quiet rebellion, her craving for independence, her refusal to lose herself in a life that didn't feel like her own, it all hit me harder than I'd expected. When I reached the line, I would give up the unessential. I would give my money. I would give my life for my children. But I wouldn't give myself tears spilled onto the pages. That's when Lila found me. I was sitting on the floor, book in hand, silently crying in the middle of the fiction aisle. She didn't say a word, just lowered herself beside me, handed me a tissue, and stayed there. When I could finally speak, I told her about the passage, about how I'd forgotten what it felt like to choose myself. She smiled softly and said, "You know, books have a funny way of finding us right when we need them. Maybe this is your awakening." Her words lingered in my heart long after I finished my shift. That night, lying in Rachel's guest bed, I found myself thinking about all the parts of me I'd given up during my marriage. My writing, my dreams of traveling, even silly things like my favorite breakfast or the music I used to love. All sacrificed in the name of keeping the peace, of becoming the woman Daniel wanted me to be. But I wasn't her anymore. The next morning, I woke up with a spark I hadn't felt in years. I reached into my suitcase and pulled out my old laptop, covered in dust and barely holding charge. I opened a blank document, and I started writing. Messy, unfiltered, raw. I wrote about my marriage, about how slowly I lost myself, about the day I left and the woman I was starting to become. It wasn't polished or perfect, but it was mine. Soon, I fell into a new rhythm. Mornings were for writing before the world stirred, pouring my thoughts out like water from a long-clogged faucet. Then I'd head to the book nook, where the quiet hum of pages and the scent of paper wrapped around me like a warm hug. The customers, the stories, even just alphabetizing Spinezit all gave me a sense of peace. Evenings were split between quiet time to myself or cozy dinners with Rachel's family. Sometimes we played board games with the kids. Other times, we sat in silence with mugs of tea. And that silence? It felt safe. Mr. Alden kept me updated on the divorce proceedings. As expected, Daniel was making things as difficult as he could. He challenged every detail, twisted every truth. But I wasn't scared anymore. With Mr. Alden in my corner and solid documentation of Daniel's abuse, I felt ready. Each update brought anxiety, yes, but also relief, because each step was one more inch toward freedom. One Saturday, 2 months after I left, Rachel convinced me to come to a yoga class with her. "It'll help you reconnect with yourself," she said. "Physically, emotionally." I was skeptical, but I went. The studio was warm and calming, filled with soft music and the soothing scent of lavender. As I moved through the poses, my body resisted years of tension locked in every joint. But slowly, with each breath, something began to shift. Near the end, we settled into savasanalaying still, just breathing. The instructor's voice floated over us. "You are strong. You are worthy. You are enough." And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I believed it. After class, flushed and sore but lighter, I turned to Rachel. "Thank you," I said quietly. She smiled and squeezed my hand. No words needed. That night, I dreamed of Daniel. He was shouting at me, his face red with rage. But his voice was muffled, like I was watching it all through glass. I stood there watching him scream, and for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt sad. For him. For the man he could have been. But not for myself. When I woke, heart racing, I lay there in the dark, stunned by the realization. His anger didn't control me anymore. I wasn't responsible for his feelings. I never had been. The next morning, I shared the dream with Rachel over coffee. She listened quietly, then said something that caught me off guard. "You know, Sophie, I think you're ready for the next step." I blinked. "What do you mean?" She smiled. "I think it's time for you to find a place of your own." "What do you mean?" I asked, tilting my head, curiosity piqued. Rachel smiled warmly. "I think it's time for you to find your own place," she said gently. "Not because we don't love having you here, believe me. We do, but because I think you're ready. Really ready to stand on your own 2 feet. The idea thrilled and terrified me at the same time. Could I do it? Live alone? Support myself? But as I sat with the thought, I realized Rachel was right. It was time. Apartment hunting was both exciting and overwhelming. I had to consider location, cost, safety, proximity to the book nook, all things I never used to think about because Daniel made every decision for us. But now I was choosing. With Rachel's help and a newfound confidence, I finally found a small studio apartment just a few blocks from the bookstore. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't big, but it was mine. Moving day was chaotic in the best way. Rachel, Mark, Emma, and Josh all pitched in hauling boxes, arranging furniture, eating way too much pizza on the floor as we laughed through the exhaustion. By evening, the space had started to take shape. The second-hand furniture we'd found at thrift shops, a few treasured belongings from my old life with Daniel, and new things just for me. Things I picked out with only myself in mind. When everyone left and the door clicked shut behind them, I stood in the middle of the room, slowly turning in a circle. A quiet, glowing sense of belonging settled over me. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to think beyond the next court date, the next task on my to-do list. What kind of life did I want? Who did I want to be? And then I remembered something my grandmother used to say: life is a story and you're the author. For so long, I'd let other people write my pages. Daniel, his family, expectations I never signed up for. But now the pen was in my hand. I turned to the small desk in the corner where my laptop waited. An idea began to form, something that had been tucked away for years. Maybe it was finally time to write the novel I'd once dreamed of. Not for Daniel, not for anyone else. For me. With a smile, I sat down, opened the laptop, and stared at the blank page. It no longer felt intimidating. It felt like freedom. I typed, Chapter 1, The Awakening. The words poured out of me. They weren't perfect, but they were real, and they were mine. As I wrote, a quiet peace settled in my chest. The road ahead would still hold challenges. My divorce wasn't finalized. Some days would be hard, but I knew, without question, I was going to be okay. More than okay. I was going to thrive. This wasn't just a new chapter. It was an entirely new book, and I couldn't wait to see how the story would unfold. As the first light of dawn broke through my window, I finally paused. I stretched, sore from sitting, but alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. I moved to the kitchen and brewed a fresh cup of coffee. Standing there, watching the sunrise paint the sky in soft pinks and glowing gold, I raised my mug, a silent toast, to new beginnings, to rediscovered strength, to the endless possibilities ahead, to my new chapter.